Mhm.
Okay, welcome to our class on positivity bias. We're on chapter 24. The chapter is called The Power of Reframing. The Power of Reframing. And I heard most of this about this concept back from Stephen Covey in Seven Habits of Highly Effective People. And he called it a paradigm shift, which is if you know a certain other piece of information, it can shift the whole perspective on how you view something, right? And I remember as a teacher, you might have a really tough kid, and then when you find out the kid's, from a divorce home and an alcoholic parent, and this what other piece of information, all of a sudden, okay, I can be a lot kinder to that kid, and I can, you know, be a lot more open to the life's challenges that he's going through because now I get it, right? So that's the idea of the paradigm shift is just knowing a little bit more about the situation that could say, okay, we're going to do some things a little bit different, right? So this chapter is all about that concept of the paradigm shift, but it's a conscientious choice. It's a conscientious choice. It's the idea that we can choose. It's called reframing in the psychological world, right? Cognitive restructuring. You can
Mhm.
choose to see things from a different light, from a different perspective, and with that in mind,
Mhm.
you can change the whole thing. So the example that he starts off with was, of course, was Mendel Lipsker, who was from Montreal, and he was a young yeshiva student in Crown Heights in New York, and he and his chavruso would go loggerheads all the time. So let me explain what that means. In a yeshiva, typically there will be a shiur, a class. And in that class, the rabbi will take another piece of Gemara and he'll run through the Gemara to make sure you understand the discussion that's going on between the rabbis in the Gemara. And you understand where each one is coming from. And they'll give that as a shiur. And then you go back and you review it again and again and again with your study partner. It's a one-on-one partnership type of learning, right? And you review what you learn. So the idea is intelligence has chachma, bina, and das, wisdom, understanding, and knowledge. Wisdom is that spark of intelligence, that introduction of an idea. Bina is working that idea, practicing that idea, looking at applications of that idea, trying to really grasp it from all different angles. Das is when you know it, you have it, right? So, for example, we might introduce an idea like in algebra. You might introduce an idea of what is an x and what is a y and what they represent, right? And the first time it's introduced, it's kind of confusing. It's a little bit overwhelming. And how are you adding letters to numbers? That's just not normal, right? But idea is introduced. Then you go home and you do your homework and you practice and you practice and you practice the idea. You understand it a little bit better. And then over the next couple of weeks, as you used it a number of different applications, you really get it, you understand it, and now X and Y, that's fine. It's not an issue anymore, right? And you understand the basics of where algebra is going with this. So the same thing in any idea, in any concept and intellectual exercise, chachma is the spark, bina is the working of it, and das is the end result, the product that you understand. It is in Hasidus, it's compared to procreation. Chachma is the sperm, the idea, all the DNA is there, all the content is there. There's 9 months of gestation. That's the bina. That's the development of it into an actual concept and construct. Das is the birth of a child. It's an entity of its own. So chachma, bina, and das. So they're sitting. So in the yeshiva system, chachma is when you have a shiur. The rabbi gives the class. He gives an introduction to the ideas. It can be overwhelming sometimes. Bina is when you review it with your partner one on one, and that's one of the interesting parts is when you go to a library and it's silent in the room, right? And you go to a Jewish study hall, you go to a base medrash, it's loud because all the pairs in the room are arguing with each other about the idea that they just learned, trying to get it clear, right? And so It's a huge difference. So the shir is the class, chavruso or beis medrash is the study back and forth until you understand it. When you understand it, you move on to the next topic, right? So this young man, Reb Mendel Lipsker from Montreal, he and his study partner were like loggerheads all the time. He'd say one thing, the other guy would say another thing, and it was just loggerhead. And so when he had a chance, and he was in New York, and he went to the Rebbe for a yechidus, a private conversation, and he told the Rebbe, I'm getting nowhere with Mecharusa because we're always constantly arguing, right? And the Rebbe said, it sounds like you have a gift for pilpul. Now, pilpul is a Yiddish word that talks about being able to take a concept through an intellectual process of yes and no and yes and no to clearly define what it is. And there's a legal jurisprudence, I want to say. There are guidelines for how this works, where you can argue, where you can't argue it. But it's 13 principles of how you do the learning. But the idea of all of that, of a pilpul, is to be able to deliver a sermon, sort of, where you walk people through the back and forth logic to come to a final conclusion. And pilpul is a Yiddish word. It's like pepper. Use pepper, sharp. So to follow a pilpul, you got to be really smart. You got to be really on the ball, sharp, and listening. To actually give one over, that is really a special talent. That's a very special talent. And so the Rebbe was telling this young bacher, it sounds like you and your chavruso have a talent for pilpul. Each one is trying to take another side. But the understanding of the pilpul is that through the argumentation, you're actually clarifying the whole point in many of its details. So it's actually it's a brilliant study process of pilpul, but you've got to be really sharp, and you've got to be attacking every little point so you can get exact clarification about what this is and what it's not.
So I have a question for our class. Is a pilpul Bob?
Bob asks wonderful clarifying questions. Yes, absolutely. But that's the beauty, right? And so when the Rebbe was telling this young guy who's saying, listen, I can't get along with my study partner, right? The fact that the Rebbe was saying, it sounds like you have a gift in pilpul, means he has a good gift in learning to ask very, very good questions that bring out a deeper understanding for everyone. And Bob, you were off screen when we compared that to you. With admiration. But so the student walked in with this feeling of, I can't study yet, we're just too argumentative. And the Rebbe reframed that to saying, you have a gift for seeking the depth of the logic in an argument. And that's marvelous. And he went back to his study partner now with a whole new perspective on the process they were doing. And it changed the whole game, right? It was a paradigm shift. By seeing that argumentative, not as a negative, but rather as a seeking better, deeper understanding of the topic. That is wonderful. That's brilliant. And so it changed the whole thing. It changed the whole game. And for him, it was a game changer, you know, as he studied further. Another example he gives here in this chapter again, is this idea of reframing, choosing to see things in a different light, right? So Shandel Itkin, she was 14 years old. She was living in New York, Brooklyn, New York. And there was a brand new school that was being opened up that its focus would be, it was truly a Lubavitch school that would integrate Hasidic philosophy and a bunch of things together. But it was a cutting edge idea. It hadn't been done before, certainly not in the girls' world, in the girls' high school realm, right? And so the school was opening up, and her father was suggesting that she should go join that school. She's 14 and she should join, right? And being a 14-year-old, very independent, demanding, that she gets to make her own decisions, she said, "No, I don't want to be a guinea pig." And her father chose not to argue with her, wise man, and he said, "Listen, why don't you ask the Rebbe for his insights? Get a third opinion from a rabbi." So she wrote to the Rebbe, and she said, "I don't want to be a guinea pig." She was very adamant in what she wrote, right? And the Rebbe, again, brilliance, right? The Rebbe returned her letter. He circled the word guinea pig, and he wrote next to it, chalutza, pioneer. A chalutza, pioneer. And this was an era when, Jews around the world were celebrating the pioneers in Israel who were willing to, the early Zionists who were willing to go out and make the land, from dust to gold. And so, the idea of her to be a chalutza, chalutza, absolutely. She's going to be a leader in doing something new and cutting new paths and doing something different and special. That she's all in. That she's all in for. And at the time of this writing of the writing of this book a couple of years ago, she was still at Beis Rivka, but now she's the principal. But again, the idea of just reframing. You're not a guinea pig. You have an opportunity to be a chalutza, pioneer. Different way of seeing the same story, right? Next story. Bobby Vogel. Bobby Vogel was a prominent businessman in London, and he was the primary funding source for the Lubavitch Boys High School. And at some point, he wrote to the Rebbe, and he said that it's too much of a burden for one person to be holding the bulk of the responsibility here, and wants to have to share some of that. And the Rebbe smiled, his classic smile, and he said, "If you had a big bag full of diamonds, and I added a few more blue-white diamonds in there, would you complain?" The Rebbe said, "You are carrying diamonds. Every neshamala, every Jewish soul that's going through your school to be polished and raised to be another leader of the Jewish community, that's you. You are polishing diamonds that are going to be the future leaders of the world. I'd like to add some more." And that shift for him was he no longer saw the school as a burden, but he saw what he was doing was making a contribution to the world uncomparable to other ways of doing it. He was almost single-handedly raising a whole group of new leaders through his contributions, and he continued to do so for the next 40 years. And added more, by the way. He didn't stop. He took that paradigm very seriously, and he went and he contributed to the girls' high school and other things as well. So very, very, very different.
So couldn't he have done a paradigm shift with the rabbi with his question of being, I want to share the responsibility to have others be blessed besides me?
Are you trying to get him out of his donations?
No, I'm not trying to get him out of his donations. I'm trying to
That's what you're doing.
No. If he thinks he's overloaded and he's worried about adding extra people and not being able to have a quality class.
No, his focus was on the financial burden, and the Rebbe gave the perfect answer. The answer being that this is not a financial burden. This is a financial opportunity of inestimable value. And when he saw the investment that he was making was an investment that would last for generations to come, because every kid that he raises solid is going to raise a family that's solid, and it'll go on for forever and ever. So, in fact, it's an infinite investment, an infinite return on his investment. And so, when he saw that as a businessman sees it, it was a perfect paradigm shift. And the next story here is, we parents do this oftentimes. We want to raise our kids to be the best of something, right? And we typically, I know my father and I had this ongoing battle when I was a teenager, because I wanted to go into teaching and my father wanted me to make a living. And this was before I ever got religious or anything else. This was even when I was in high school. I wanted to be a teacher. My father wanted me to be able to make a living and raise a family financially responsible. And no teaching job really does that very well. So that was an argument we were having, right? My focus was on what I wanted to do and what I'm passionate about, and his was on financial responsibility, which is what he did very well. And that's what parents want to do, right? So we from the very young age, we instill in Lubavitch, we instill in our children the importance of community leadership, and that you are not an island unto yourself. You are part of a much larger community, and that you are responsible for that larger community. And you want to have a good, solid Torah education so that you can lead in the dissemination of Torah true values. And this student, he found that no matter how hard he worked, he was never more than average as a student. And it was depressing. And at some point when he was in yeshiva, he went to the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva, and he shared that, he's struggling. And the Rosh Yeshiva, the head of the yeshiva, in an attempt to comfort him, said, listen, not everybody's cut out for it, and you can become a businessman, and you can support Jewish education as a good businessman. Well, that was devastating for him, because he always wanted to be the rabbi, and he always wanted to be the Torah scholar, right? And to be a businessman would be like a second class type of thing. And so he wrote to the Rebbe about, the destruction of his childhood aspirations, his dreams about what he wanted to do, and that was just not his skill set, right? And the Rebbe wrote back, quoting a Mishnah that clearly articulates the mission statement of human existence. I was created to serve my Creator. And that one of those ways is to be a Torah scholar. But just as important is to support Torah studies. But the end goal of every human being is the same, to serve God. And the Rebbe also clarified that the skills that we are naturally born with, the God-given skills that we have, that is a divine hint to where we are needed. Our God-given skill set is a hint to what it is that we're supposed to be doing in the world. That's the area that we can be the most productive and make the greatest contribution. So for some people, it will be medicine. For some people, it will be law. But not everybody. For some of us, it's education. For some of us, it's civil service. And each person has their specific skill sets. And that skill set is a divine gift as to where you're needed in this world, where your contribution will be most beneficial according to God's divine plan. And again, given that perspective, he was no longer depressed, but he realized that he did have a different opportunity, and it wasn't as a second-class citizen, but rather as an equal partner. And we look at the Torah, we talk about Zvulun and Yisachar and Zvulun. One was the merchant ships and ran the seaports, and the other ones, they sat and learned Torah. They were the Torah scholars. The Torah scholars didn't have an income. The merchants had plenty of income, and they gave half of what they earned to the tribe of the other tribe, so that the Torah scholars were equal partners in the business, but the Torah learning that they did and taught was equally owned by those who contribute to the yeshiva. And it was a 50-50 deal. So those people who were out on their ships and bemoaning the fact that they don't have time to sit and study Torah, because being in the Navy, Ron will attest to you, and Bernie will as well, is an all the time job. They don't call them hotbeds for nothing, right? So the idea was that those people who were working the ships, the merchant ships, those businesses, their Torah study is their contribution, their financial contribution to those who are studying. They get 50% of the schar limud, the merit of the Torah learning done and the Torah teaching done. And it was a business partnership. And so that paradigm shift was what was helpful for him to be able to go on and actually make his contribution in the world. And it wasn't meant to be in Torah study. It was meant to be in supporting yeshivas and supporting Torah studies. And the last story here was the story about Avram Glick. He started, as so many other people in the Lubavitch school system, your initial ideal is to become a rabbi and to teach Torah. And he started working at the yeshiva day school in Melbourne, Australia. But he did have a chush. He did have an extra skill set in administrative work, and he ended up more and more in the administrative end of things. And you know what administrators have to do? They're the policemen in the school. Jeff is smiling. He knows exactly what that looks like. Not only years of police work,
skill set, huh?
a God-given gift.
Yeah,
that's it. A God-given gift to be able to, and yet, Avram felt like he's not teaching. He's a policeman. He's running discipline in the hallways, and he felt that's not what he came to do. He came to be a teacher, right? And the Rebbe explained to him, in Jewish law, there are 39 types of halachas about what we don't do on Shabbos. And by and large, destructive work is not breaking Shabbos, is not a work on Shabbos. All of the work is constructive work. It has a purpose, it has an intent, right? So how is it that plowing a field is considered a malacha on Shabbos? Because basically you're just tearing up the field. You're turning over the ground and tearing up the field. But in order for the plants to grow, it has to be plowed, because only then, when it's properly plowed, can the seeds actually take root and be able to grow in the hard soil. And the Rebbe said it's the same thing in schools, that for teachers to be able to teach, there has to be discipline. Discipline is the plowing of the field that allows the students to learn. And so by teaching the discipline, you're actually at the foundational level of education, because you can't learn if you can't sit still. You can't learn if you can't behave. Discipline is the priority to Jewish education. And so by doing the administrative work, you are actually plowing the field. You're creating the foundation by which the Torah learning can then continue.
So tell me, is that destructive or productive?
Yes, so it's absolutely productive. And we just say the same thing. Are you allowed to tear down an old synagogue? Absolutely not. It's a holy place. Can you tear it down to build a new one? Oh, yes, absolutely. Because that's constructive. Not on Shabbos.
It's productive.
But the idea comes down to, is the destruction for the sake of a construction, and we talk about a yerida l'tzarach aliyah, a descent for the purpose of an ascent. Think of a basketball player. Before every good jump shot, he goes down so he can get a better up, right? So the same thing, if the destruction is for the purpose of a construction, then absolutely, it is a constructive activity. And it's interesting because we even go to the idea of, if someone is fuming angry and they go in the kitchen and they start smashing plates, is that constructive or is that destructive?
It
Constructive.
depends.
It's suicidal.
It's constructive.
And it's absolutely
It can be
suicidal.
controlled.
It's constructive.
So
It's
it's
changing
constructive?
it's changing the emotions,
I was gonna
letting the
say,
anger out.
maybe it's not a bad thing to vent like that rather than hit somebody.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
You still
And
have to
so
deal
that
with
is
the wife.
exactly what the answer is that smashing the plates is able to vent the anger in a less destructive method than could be. Better you should take it out on the plates than on the kids.
Yeah.
And so therefore, in that
And so-
circumstance, there's no Mechalel Shabbos, there's no desecration of Shabbos, because that activity was constructive.
And it's good for the plate makers in the future
Mm.
because you'll be buying some new ones.
Paper plates are great.
Paper plates.
Not for your anger.
Tear up the
They're
paper
not good.
plates.
Paper plates are not good for anger management.
They are if you tear them.
Uh-huh.
No, I'm sorry.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
nowhere near the
Mm,
satisfaction of smashing
Yeah.
a plate than it is to tearing a piece of paper.
You
Experience.
know, there used to be a place that had a business doing that. You know, they set up a place where you bring in old plates, old furniture, and there's in a room, and you pay. And the person that comes in pays money, pays for the privilege to go in there, and like you have like a half hour, smash everything out, and then they settle the account, and then they leave, and that's that's the business.
Well, they have ox growing places where you
Yeah.
can do that.
Yeah, the places you can do that.
Absolutely.
You have to pay for it, but you can do that if it helps you. So be
Yeah.
it.
And the Greek restaurants used to allow breaking dishes,
Oh yeah.
but I think it became dangerous.
Oh, but,
Of course, if they put